got sick and bloody tired of writing all my blogs down, so this time I'm going to record it. So you get to listen to my sweet, sultry voice for the next however long it takes to talk about this. So this is me, Joseph Salmon, talking about the process behind the production of Raising Michael. So I should probably start with how the idea came about. And it was actually a few years ago that I was in a small town in the middle of nowhere, typical English town, the kind of thing you expect to see in Hot Fuzz. And I was using the public toilets, as you do, and I saw some graffiti for... It still makes me laugh. It's like, it was a piece of graffiti that said, hereabouts, leather sofa and chair set, £450, call this number. And there was something about that I just found ridiculous. Probably, I think it was like just the inherent hilarity of the juxtaposition between what graffiti usually is, you know, gang signs, you know, looking for fun times, go here, that kind of dirtier, sleazier kind of things, and like contrasted with the really innocent graffiti that I saw of someone wanting to sell their sofa. And that kind of sparked a few ideas. I was stood there having a tinkle, and I was working through ideas in my head of small sketches I could do with this. The idea of a sofa set being a ridiculous euphemism for some obscure sexual act, or the idea of there actually being a genuine piece of graffiti for, sexy ladies, go here. And then someone not understanding that, someone reading it maybe a bit too literally, and calling the number and expecting to have literally, the fun times, but expecting to have literal fun times, to have a nice day in the park, to have a nice cycle ride, nice ice cream, picnic, all that stuff. And I thought about these ideas for a while, and then I shelved them, as you do, come up with ideas, and then you never really think of them again. And a couple of years passed, and I ended up working on a film as a runner. It sounds like a random aside, but it becomes relevant later. And when I was working on this film, as a runner and occasional extra, I met a couple of the other extras, who, between them, were probably the most talented group of people I know. And that's Ryan, Tash, Tom and TK. I'll talk about them later. But anyway, after that, time passed again, and I was set a brief for the professional project. And I knew from the start that I wanted to do video production. So I wanted to write a script, and then I wanted to direct it, because that was something that I felt that I'd never really had the opportunity to do to the extent that I wished to do so. I'd never, like the stuff that I had written, I then wasn't happy with how it had been produced. Not as a discredit to the people who were producing stuff that I'd written. It's purely that we had different visions of what should come out of that. And so I wanted to be able to write something and then take that and make it myself. And also, as this is something that I want to get into, this is the field that I'd like to explore, the field that I'd like to go into as a potential career. I still hadn't found my niche. I didn't know if I wanted to be a writer, didn't know if I wanted to be a director, a cinematographer, God knows what. So this was my opportunity to explore all of those and see which one I liked the most. And I knew that to do all of those would be quite a challenge, because I'd be taking on several roles at once. But I thought to myself, yes, this is going to be a lot of hard work, but it's going to be one of those things where if I just knuckle down and do it, then it'll all come together in the end. Didn't necessarily turn out like that, but that's my mindset at the beginning. So I was thinking of ideas I could do, scripts I could write, and I was going through all the past ideas that I had, mentally shelved for future production. But the only one that really stuck was this graffiti idea, which eventually became Raising Michael. And I think the reason that that idea stuck is because I was kind of fascinated by the concept of a person who takes everything at face value. He interprets the world so literally and innocently, and just sees the world through rose-tinted glasses, as it is nice to do. And this actually explains in a scene that we never actually filmed for Raising Michael. There's what I call the Peter Pan speech, where the character of Leonard compares Michael to Peter Pan. And the exact line is, he is a boy who's never had to grow up because the world has never demanded it of him. He's never gone through any traumatizing experiences. He is distinguished by the fact that he is average. He's distinctly normal, but minus the troubles of normal people. And he was essentially a child in an adult's body, not in a special needs mental kind of way. He just had never really grown up, never matured. And that is what I think fascinated me about the character, which is how the story kind of developed, where I imagined this character the kind of person who would interpret this graffiti so literally. And I just kind of took it from there. Like, what would this person do? What would they be? Would it be a 40-year-old man, working in Tesco? Would he be a 20-year-old student still struggling to get a degree in, today's education system? And the characters slowly started to form around this central character. Before the plot ever really came to fruition, there were the characters, and because the script was meant to be character based. I knew that I wanted, before the script ever had a tangible form, I knew that I wanted it to be character based rather than situation based, because in situation based comedies, like, the characters are so interchangeable. You could literally replace them with any other character from any other comedy and it would still be funny because it's the situation that they're in. But I wanted it to be a lot more personal than that. I wanted there to be characters that you genuinely felt for and that evoked some kind of emotion from the audience. So I started with the characters and then the script evolved from there. Now, the initial script was about 12 pages long and it was vastly different from what eventually became Raising Michael, because whilst it was a comedy, it was also quite dark at places, because where, as I said, this introverted, innocent character of Michael had never gone through any traumatizing experiences, being suddenly thrust into situations that he just lacked the mental capacity to handle, lacked the experience to almost understand what was going on. He was almost going in some very dark places mentally, with, spoiler warning, with this character of Amy being pregnant with his child, yet not wanting him to be there as a father figure, him being almost shoved out from his child's life. And in the initial script, that gave the whole plot a very much a darker edge, which it eventually lost, because before I wrote it, I knew that I didn't want to be restricted by the conventions of pre-Watershed comedy. At this point, I wasn't quite sure if I wanted it to be a TV pilot or a web series, or I wasn't quite sure what it was, but I knew that whatever it was, I didn't want it to be limited. And whilst I didn't go out of my way to make it crude or explicit. I didn't want to, from the beginning, limit myself to it not being crude or explicit, as you can probably tell with with some of Madge's actions in the finished piece. So originally, this character of Michael was taken to some very dark places, and but as the script progressed, it went from 12 pages to, I think, 20 pages until the final script was about 30 pages. It went through several stages where it was almost like Fight Club or A Beautiful Mind, where there was an exploration of Michael's mental stability. But then rereading these scenes where his sanity was not he wasn't explicitly said to be not quite there, but his attachment to reality was questioned. But I realized that however much I liked what that did with the character, it made the character a lot harder to relate to, as you know, the majority of people, obviously won't have themselves experience these mental dark places that this character was going to. So I tracked that one back a bit, and I brought it back to him just being a normal, mentally healthy individual who nonetheless was behind everyone else in terms of maturity and development. So the script was at this 12-page point when I called on my friend Sophie Martin, who you might recognise as being Amy in Raising Michael. Sophie and I have worked together on several previous projects. I think every project that I've done outside of uni, she and I have worked together on, and because I wanted a fresh perspective on it. And she and I, where we've worked together so many times, if one of us has like a genuinely crap idea, we're not afraid. The other one isn't afraid to say, "No, that's awful. Just never speak of that again." So I brought in Sophie as a fresh perspective and as a critic of what I'd written, knowing that she could honestly tell me what was good and what was bad. And so she helped me a bit, especially with Amy's dialogue. I'd written that, and Sophie didn't find all of that entirely believable. And even though she wasn't at this point supposed to be playing Amy, her input was invaluable in creating the character, because obviously I don't have much experience being a teenage girl, whereas Sophie does. So she and I, we went through the script, and with her help I developed it to about 20 pages and then to 30. And the characters became, when I say different, I don't mean the characters are in any way lessened. I don't dislike them any more than I did the original characters, but they did succumb to cliche somewhat. Michael became somewhat caricatured, less of the quiet introvert that we all know, and more of he was more exaggerated figure meant to represent the introvert of the world rather than actually being one. So that became quite different. The other characters being, Amy, who I wanted to have a kind of not the cliche of the all-American girl next door, but the kind of party girl that everyone knows. And I wanted everyone to know Anne Amy, for her to have like a feature to which everyone could relate. There's also the Leonard, the old standby of the loyal but somewhat exasperated friend, where he's trying to help Michael get over his innocence, childlike nature, but that's almost a lost battle already, where Michael is, he's been this innocent person for so long now that Leonard has quite a task of trying to drag him out of his shell, something which would have been explored in later episodes had this continued. And there was Mark, one of my favourite characters, who when we wrote the character of Mark, I was looking for a word to describe him, just a single word, and the word I settled on was dickhead, where you almost have to question what he's doing, being friends with Michael, someone who you really cannot imagine ever wanting to be, like, the two ever wanting to be friends. I think it was Leonard that really brought them together. But as the episode progresses, you can see the divide between Mark and Michael, where their friendship isn't strong enough for Mark to be able to resist the temptation of Amy. There's also Claire, who you don't really see in the final piece, because most when we had a lot of trouble with the actors, Claire's scenes became more and more written out, or her dialogue given to other characters, and Claire also almost became something of an in-joke within the production, wherein her character was fairly instantly forgettable, which as production progressed, I actually quite liked this about her, where she was the one where in this group she would be the one that they always forget to invite to gatherings, the one that where they'll all have a conversation and then they'll realise halfway through that Claire has been there all along. She's a very forgettable character, but memorable because of that. So something of a contradiction there. And the other character that you never really see is Lola. Now, Lola was a problem because in the original script we wanted there to be a new character towards the end who picks up Michael from his depression, who salvages his innocence and his childlike nature from the situation that he's found himself in. And that character was originally Lola, who was going to be played by Sophie. But Lola was hard to pin down. She was bubbly. She was similar to Michael, yet different at the same time. She had that innocence, but she was very extroverted. She didn't mind making a fool of herself. She didn't care what other people thought of her. So in different respects, she was very similar to Michael, but very different at the same time. But with and I was quite annoyed that we didn't actually get to put Lola into the finished piece, but where we were struggling with actors and Amy was the central character, we had to recast Sophie from the character of Lola to Amy, purely to accommodate the more important character. And Lola was eventually, we just had to draw a line under the character and just say, maybe if we do more episodes, she'll appear there. But for now, we just don't have the actors, which was annoying. She was one of my favourite characters, but it just wasn't pragmatic to try and force the character through, try and force someone to be in it. And I think that, to start with, certainly casting was probably one of the biggest issues. The writing of the script was fairly seamless. Once the initial idea evolved, it was very easy to carry on from that and develop it to a full script. But the actors were a problem in that I had fairly specific ideas of what I wanted from the characters, and without a budget, without any funding behind this project, I couldn't afford to bring in professional or even semi-professional actors, and so it was mostly down to who I could ask, friends I could ask, just people I knew who might be up for doing it. But then the problem in that as well was that there were people who were up for acting who didn't mind lending their time to the project, but again, where I had a fairly solid idea of what I wanted the characters to be, some of the actors who were, or some people who are up for acting just wouldn't have been right for any of the parts. So it was a bit of a problem for a while to try and find someone who was both up for it and right for the part. Now I was really lucky in that I had imagined that finding the character of Michael would be the hardest, where he's he's a very different kind of character. His, I imagined, would have been the hardest one to play, because for the other characters you can to a reasonable degree you can just be yourself and just say the lines as you would say them. But Michael is different to normal people. And that was the greatest challenge in finding an actor for him. But I was actually lucky where Ryan, as I mentioned earlier, who I met on this as an extra on the Stalled production, he and I we discussed doing some kind of project together. And so when this project came about, I rang him up and I asked if he would be up for acting, having seen him as, you know, acting in this film as an extra, and knowing that he was capable. And from the beginning, from the first test reading, it was evident that he could not have been more right for the part. He just knew what the character was about, and he knew what I wanted from the character. And I think casting Ryan as Michael was probably the best decision I made before filming began. The other problem, what became known as the Mark problem, where we originally had a friend of mine to play Mark, but he was a very different Mark to the one that we eventually found in Madge, because the original Mark was not quite a jock. I don't want to say jock, 'cause that's very cliched, but that kind of cocky, arrogant. He pushes the line. He definitely knows where the line is and seeks to go beyond and seeks to go further than that. And he's almost a bit of a dick. And that was kind of the Mark that we originally scripted. He was a lot less likable than Madge's interpretation of Mark. And we did have a guy who again I'd worked with before, who would have been brilliant for playing that kind of character, and he agreed. And you know, we set out dates, you know, when he would be free to act, when it would be good to film, and so that all seemed great. But then it was probably, I think, the day we were going to film the first group scene, and I texted him to make sure that he was still able to film, and he had gone back to Manchester or wherever it was, and so at the really last minute we had to find a different actor to play Mark. With bearing in mind, you know, the nature of the character, I had a mini panic attack over where I believe I wouldn't find him in time. We'd have to call off filming. But as it was, Madge was available on this first day of group filming, which was the party scene which we filmed at Diana's house. And he came along with absolutely no idea of what we wanted, what I was asking him to do. He didn't have any lines for that scene, which is fortunate, but still, he had absolutely no idea what he was getting himself into. And he was perfect. He could not have encapsulated Mark any better. He probably even a better Mark than the one that I had originally imagined. So that worked out incredibly well. But that night did also have some inherent problems, where I had, going back to the friends that I made on this film, one of them, Tom, among other things, is a sound recording artist. He has his own boom mic and his own sound recording equipment. So as this was the first the first day of shooting that required a reasonably extensive amount of dialogue, I'd asked if he would be able to if he'd be able to come along and record audio for me, and that didn't go as well as I'd hoped. It was the very first problem I'd had with audio on this project, the first of many, and even he didn't know what the problem was. Where we plugged the microphone into the camera, it didn't seem to be recording properly. Where we were getting sound, but the sound was only playing out of, when we watched it back on the computer, the sound was only playing out of the left speaker. So I'm not sure if that was a problem with the camera, with the microphone, or if we had just done something wrong. But we recorded the audio as best as we could, but it was still not as good as I'd hoped. That night as a whole, though, I think was very successful. We didn't have the extras that I'd originally organised. That none of them were able to take part. So the hallway scene, where they're supposed to be entering the party, which was originally supposed to be lined with extras, that is considerably more bare than I'd originally imagined. But Tom, the sound guy, he filled in as an extra whilst I was camera working, and Vari, who was also my assistant camera operator, she filled in as an extra, and so it could have been worse. As it is, I'm happy with how that initial shot turned out. Yeah, so that first group film was the first night of group filming, I think, was successful. Now, from this, we went on to film what was one of the more complicated scenes to film, which was the public toilet scene, which is actually missing from the final piece. We decided to remove it, and in the end, just not film it, because we tried the scene at the very beginning of Raising Michael, where my character walks up and puts this sign up on the bus stop. That was originally written as the character of Michael seeing some graffiti in a public toilet. As as I said, the inspiration came from. I wanted to follow on from that with actually having Michael find the graffiti in a public toilet. But within that idea, there were inherent difficulties of filming a public toilet, when we couldn't just close up a public toilet. It's a public toilet. We couldn't just close it up for a couple of hours. Nor could we just film in there and just hope that no one would come in, because obviously we don't want to get in trouble with people feeling that this was an invasion of privacy. Obviously, we wouldn't film whilst people were in there, but we couldn't just someone walking in and finding a camera crew in there might find that a bit unnerving. So we tried to film. We found the remotest public toilet that we could, and we tried to film there. We found out what time it closed, and we tried to start filming there about half an hour before it closed, to give us. It was a couple of very simple shots, so hopefully we had hoped that it would only take half an hour, and we'd hoped that by that point, there would be no one there trying to use it. But on this first attempt at filming in a public toilet, we arrived, we got out the cameras, and we got out the tripod, and no sooner had we finished setting up than the council officials arrived to lock up the toilet for the night. Now they did understand, and they were helpful, and they did say that we could film for 2 minutes whilst they close up the other toilets, which was more than I had imagined that we would get. So I was grateful for that, but 2 minutes just wasn't enough time to film what we wanted to film. So the footage that we got that night was it was rushed, it was out of focus, the exposure was all over the place, and overall it was unusable. And we were going to try that again, but we didn't want to waste another night of filming on something that we thought wouldn't come to fruition. So we decided to leave that scene and potentially rewrite it as we were filming everything else. So we put that scene on hold. The next scene though was the bedroom scene, when they're, Amy and Michael are upstairs having their night together. And I had originally planned on saving that one till last because I knew that it would be the most awkward scene to film, and I didn't want to make things difficult for the actors. Now, as I'd originally written it, I'd planned the scene so that you never saw, after they went upstairs, you wouldn't see the two of them together in the same shot. It would have gone into mostly first person mode. Which would mean that then Sophie wouldn't have to straddle Ryan. Ryan having a fiance, Sophie having a boyfriend. I didn't want to create an issue out of whether they were willing to do that, whether their partners were willing to let them do that, just for the purpose of my film. But we filmed the first person shots, and they spoke about it briefly, and it was actually the two of them that suggested that they would be okay with getting some other shots of Sophie actually straddling Ryan and doing it properly, because they felt that it wasn't, although it was clear what was going on, it didn't quite convey the nature of what was going on, where Michael was high on love and emotion, whereas Amy was just drunk. They felt that that could have been conveyed better if I did actually show them, if we did actually show Sophie straddling Ryan. So we went ahead with that, and that went again better than I could have planned, and it let us do different shots that I didn't imagine we could have been able to put in. Like, I particularly like the ones of where Ryan is laying on the bed and Sophie straddling him, and the camera pans up and down between her being frustrated and her fiddling with the buttons on his shirt, and it's just little things like that I think added to the scene as a whole. So I was very happy with how that night of filming went, and I was extremely grateful to the actors for being so accommodating to producing this. Now, I think it's fair to say that the next day of filming, which is when we shot the scenes at the uni in the booth, and in the long shot across the booths and all the other scenes at uni, that was the single worst day of filming. I think that was the low point of Raising Michael, both in terms of problems of filming and how I personally felt about how things were going, because for several reasons, really. Firstly, because at this point I still hadn't really got to grips with directing. I'd been okay up until that point because I had been directing people that I knew. But I did find it easier to direct Ryan and Sophie because I knew them better than Madge or Tails, and Sophie especially. I've known her since we were 4, so it was very easy to give her instructions. Ryan, I've got to know really well since we were installed together. But the others were a bit tricky, but the new factor which made that particular day of filming a bit more complicated was the introduction of Claire, the instantly forgettable character of Claire, wherein well, firstly, I had arranged for someone to play Claire on that day, but she cancelled at the last minute. And so then and when I say last minute, I mean literally 11th hour. Everyone was at uni, and we were setting up, and and then she said that she wasn't able to do it anymore. So so then it became a frantic search for anyone and everyone we knew between us who might be able to do it, and we got desperation reached the point that I decided that it would still be acceptable to replace, or to have the character of Claire as Clancy, as a guy, purely just so we could get anyone to be in it. Like if we could find a guy or a girl, anyone who was willing to sacrifice a couple of hours to help the project, but we couldn't find anyone until one of Tails' housemates happened to be in uni on that day, and she said that she would that she would help us out. So obviously I was very grateful, but that, like, I personally found that a bit more difficult to direct someone that I had never met before. I mean, that's not a criticism of her. She was really helpful. She was good. She was good. She was comfortable in the role. But that's more a failing on my part, where I wasn't at that point comfortable enough directing to be able to give direction to someone that I hadn't known. So that then impacted my feelings towards the rest of the shoot for that day, where I was slightly more on edge. I was because I didn't know this girl. I didn't want to be too bossy with her or any of the others, and maybe offend her somehow. And it really and the others could tell that I was getting frustrated, which kind of dampened attitudes all around, which I shouldn't have let happen. That was totally a failure on my part, but that we were able to move past to a degree. Is just the biggest problem on this day was, again, the audio. Now for this one, I had, rather than use Tom, who had previously done sound, I had decided to rent or to book out a microphone, a boom microphone from the uni, in the hope that it was just a piece of faulty equipment beforehand, and that with a new mic, it would record the audio better. But if anything, it was a million times worse. We had, first of all, it wouldn't record audio at all. The settings on the camera I was using, the 5D Mark II, are limited, to say the least. You have the only audio settings are on or off, and you do get a slight amount of freedom in terms of how high the audio recording levels are, but other than that, you're fairly restricted on the 5D Mark II. And first of all, like I said, the microphone wouldn't record any sound at all, and then after that, it filmed or it recorded the audio very quietly with a light rustling noise over it, despite the fact that it still had the wind protection over the microphone, and we're inside, so there's nothing to cause the rustling sound, but nonetheless it was there. And none of the technicians, I think I had at one point 3 technicians looking at the camera and the microphone, and none of them could figure out what the problem was. So we had to do what best we could, with what we had. But the rustling noise became worse throughout the day, to the point that the footage from the end of shooting on that day was unusable. It was absolutely you couldn't hear the dialogue at all. They might as well have not been speaking for how much they were drowned out by this rustling, crackling noise. Now, the next day of filming was at Ryan and TK's apartment, which is where we'd set Michael, Leonard and Mark's apartment for Raising Michael. And we were filming the scene in which Michael comes home seeking comfort from Leonard and Mark. This scene turned out a lot more static than I'd intended. I had originally planned it to be set in the hallway where Michael enters, but practicality dictated that it was better to film with everyone gathered around the sofa, having a more central point. And in some aspects, this worked. You know, it felt a bit more sitcom-esque, in that, you know, in a sitcom where they have a set location like Friends or Big Bang Theory, they're often centered around the sofa when they talk, and it just anchors the scene somewhat. It gives it a more familiar setting. So in that aspect, it worked out okay. But in terms of how the scene flows, there's something about it. It's too static for my liking. Even though the day of filming went well, and I'm happy with how it turned out, that would probably be one of the scenes that I would reshoot given the chance. I would keep everything the same, keep the dialogue the same. It's purely that I would move it somewhere else. But that's just me being finicky, and having watched it several times over. Then again, after that, at Ryan's apartment, where we were filming the getting ready scene. The getting ready scene had originally been written for the character of Leonard. This was supposed to be Leonard trying to prepare Michael for this big evening out. But where Tails was only free on certain days and at certain times, we had to replace Leonard's part in this scene with Mark, which I was originally skeptical of, but as it turned out to be probably one of the funniest scenes in episode 1, maybe even the whole thing. So I'm definitely glad things turned out the way they did. And I think that it shows probably one of the greatest strengths of the script, in that we had to make a change at the last minute, and the reason that we hadn't storyboarded during pre-production stages was that we knew that there would be, like, we knew from past experience that there would be times at which one actor wouldn't be able to make it, something would go wrong, and we would have to accommodate for that. So by allowing that flexibility in the pre-production stages, it enabled us to have a lot more fluid production, and we were able to adapt when things didn't go quite according to plan. So when it came to filming the getting ready scene, we were able to take the essence of the scene and rewrite the dialogue around it. Now the basics stay the same, with the what I call the Tarantino shot of the camera being inside the cupboard, inside the wardrobe, and the doors opening and then talking through the clothes. That was in the original script, but the sex montage wasn't, and that again I think shows the strength of the script, where the funniest moment one of the funnier moments in the first episode, we were able to come up with maybe an hour before we began filming. So even though that hadn't gone to plan, it had gone better than I had planned, so that turned out well. After that was the morning after scene. We were supposed to be filming Amy's horrified reaction to the night before. But the problem with that was that was filmed at my house, in my sister's bedroom, which she kindly let us use. But whilst we were setting up, I suddenly became ill, and I was actually directing from the bathroom. I was throwing up in the toilet and Vari was camera working for me, and she'd show me what she shot, and I was telling her what to do from there. So after about half an hour of me directing from the toilet, I just had to call it and just say, you know what, guys, this just isn't working. Like, you guys are doing great, and you've been really optimistic and helpful, but we're just going to call filming off for tonight. So that was that. Bearing in mind that was coming close to the deadline that I had set myself, that I had wanted to be finished filming by, so that I could carry on editing. Bear in mind how close that was to the deadline. That was a real kick in the teeth to not be able to film that day. And this flexibility of production is also evident in the scene that takes place at Amy's brother's apartment, to which Amy retreats following the events of the first episode. And this scene was originally the Peter Pan scene that I mentioned earlier, in which Leonard explains to Claire just why Michael is the way he is, about how he was sheltered, he hasn't grown up because he hasn't had to. But as production progressed and we'd filmed most of the scenes and I'd been able to watch them back, I realised that we'd seen enough of Michael's character to understand him, as much as an audience can, where Michael can be a fairly complex character, and we haven't necessarily seen many sides of him yet. But from what has been shown of him, I think the audience understood him. But Amy, I felt that we weren't seeing enough of her. She was purely there, almost for the sex scene, and then to get angry at Michael. I felt that we weren't seeing enough of her motivations, of her as a character. She was more of a plot point than an actual person at this point. And so we replaced the Peter Pan scene with a scene in which Amy explains to Leonard why, where she is with things. And this works on two levels, because it worked to explain, or to show them how distraught and upset Amy is. But it also goes to show how Leonard is trying to help Michael in ways that Michael doesn't necessarily know about, when it reinforces that Leonard is a good friend to Michael, something which I felt also we needed more of. And of course, the other important thing that we were able to get with this newly rewritten scene is the part in which Mark rings Amy, with their relationship being somewhat ambiguous at this point. If I felt it needed we needed some more contact from Mark to Amy in order to make the audience a little more just suspicious that something was going on there, as Leonard was when Mark rang Amy. These two characters who previously hadn't interacted to any great extent or in any positive way. Following this, we filmed the scene in which my character, the kind of the sleazy guy who you see putting up the poster for the prostitute, in which my character appears to Michael in a dream to prompt him to apologise to Amy for being a bit of a dick. And this scene was actually quite an important scene, because what had originally been written as the Lola scene was a scene in which Lola, this happy, bubbly personality, she is the instigator for Michael apologising. She convinces him that he has been unreasonable, in that, yes, he's going through a really tough time, but so is Amy, and he's not taking it into account. So we needed something to catalyse that change of heart. There was also originally a scene with Mark and Leonard, and where they talk to Michael and try and convince him, unsuccessfully in the original script, but they try and convince him to just sit and talk to Amy about what's going on. But when it came to the day of filming this, and where I was running short of time for the deadline that I had set to leave myself enough time to edit, where I was running short of time, there was one day in which we could film that scene, and neither Tails nor Mads were free. So we had to do the best we could with who we had, and obviously we couldn't have Amy be the instigator for this apology, because that just wouldn't have made much sense, and it was far too late. It was far too late in the episode to introduce a new character. Even aside from the problems of finding someone to play that character, and having to even develop a character. So the only real option was for me to do it, and we about 9 o'clock in the morning we sat down and we brainstormed ideas. We had various thoughts of what to do. One of the original ideas was to have Michael ring the number again, and this time with the guy actually turning up, just so that he has someone to talk to, with his friends, in his mind abandoning him. But the idea that we eventually settled on was that of a dream sequence, with my character, where my character was the one that prompted him to that put up a sign for him that enabled him to call his prostitute at the very beginning, which kind of started which was the instigator for all the events of Raising Michael. It added, it rounded, it was a nice circular point to come back to if my character did return. And in a dream just felt like there was more potential for humour there. So we got a script together, and we filmed that scene. I hadn't wanted to film. I hadn't wanted to act again, but it just practicality demanded it. And I'm happy with how it went. I mean, because it was easy to come up with a script on the day, where we had what is known as the "fuck the Queen" scene, purely from a line of dialogue in the original scene from between Mark, Leonard, and Michael. One of Mark's lines is "fuck the Queen," which would make sense in context. But as you may have guessed from what I was saying about the dream scene, by this point we decided that filming in a public toilet was just impractical. We were too afraid of having someone coming in and having a problem with us filming, or us getting the police taking interest in the fact that we were filming in a public toilet. So we discussed ways in which Michael could find this number from which to call a prostitute. Internet pop-ups were an idea, but the other one, which we decided before we'd filmed the dream scene, was that I would play a sleazy, low-level. I'm not quite sure how the pimping hierarchy works, but a low-level pimp who was going around putting up posters with the number on it, so that Michael can call it. So we filmed a couple of versions of this scene. We filmed one where where I just blue tacked it onto a lamppost, and that went well enough in terms of how it looked, but there was a group of youths, curse the youths, who were hanging around just slightly down the road from where we were filming, who were beeping horns on their mopeds and shouting and disrupting the scene, which wasn't, it didn't bother us when we were filming it. It's just when we came to editing it, it meant that the sound was, again, unusable. Sound being the consistent problem with this piece. So we tried it again late at night at at a bus shelter that we found. Spent nearly an hour driving around trying to find a suitable bus shelter, which looked better. To be honest, I think that was a good call. I think it was Sophie's idea to use a bus shelter, but yeah, I'm happy with how that scene turned out. Especially with how limited the time was at this point. The deadline that I'd set myself in which to have enough time to edit had been and gone, and it was really coming up to the 11th hour at this point. And it hadn't quite sunk in yet that at this point that the rough edit that I'd been doing, or like as we progressed, would have to be transformed into a final edit, using just a program as basic as iMovie, rather than using After Effects or Final Cut, purely because there just wasn't enough time. I hadn't, although I'd started on this project fairly early, the scripting stage took so much longer than it should have done that it left me with very little time for editing. But by that point, the filming had finished. And I was happy. I was happy enough with how it went, so I had to call it a day on the filming and begin the editing. And the editing process wasn't as bad as I had feared in terms of how hard it was, purely because I'd been editing as I'd gone on iMovie. But just in that, I'm unhappy with how it went because I didn't want to edit on iMovie. It's a great program if you just want to whack a few things together, but for any serious editing, it's just not the program you want. And so I had two all-nighters in a row, which was hard. Which is why I was a bit cranky on the day of the crit. But it got done, it got finished, and overall, I'm pretty happy with how it went. I'm absolutely ecstatic about the response it got. I was so happy with the way it was received, both on the crit day and following the crit day. People being overwhelmingly positive about it. The sound was obviously not as good as I'd hoped it would be, but overall, I'm now calling it a day on Raising Michael, and I'm calling it a successful day.